SDIC August 17th board meeting order. Roll call votes. Ken Anderton.
Ken Anderton is present.
Tanny Stephenson.
Present.
And Tom Hansel is present as well. This meeting is being recorded. Thank you, Emily. Public testimony today?
There is none.
There is no public testimony. We're going to recognizing Tanny's time schedule. I'm going to ask that we move to item E, signing authorities. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we had set aside this time for SDIC to have further discussion about the signing authorities that were presented at the last meeting. And so I think we've had the opportunity to discuss the signing authorities a couple more times with Tanny for his involvement on the JCA and the urban district. But the other board members haven't had the same, additional discussion. So I think to the extent that you want to discuss more about that, I'm happy to answer questions, or I don't know, Tanny, if you have any additional insight from those other meetings or further questions that you wanted to have us answer.
No, I would say from my perspective, it was really more of a reporting, making sure that we, had adequate information coming back and we're not getting information a year later, a once a year update type of thing. And you can see in there, they're looking at probably doing updates quarterly. And we can have them, at really any time the board wants them. And for me, I think that kind of solves my big issue.
Great. Well, that's great to hear.
Point of information for you, Mr. Chair. I think, Ken, you heard this. We're also going to be working with Nick to prepare more regular financial updates, just the broader budget. And then again, we'll be doing underneath my signature authority, we'll be bringing you regular updates on what we're using that authority for. But I wanted to make sure you were aware we're also going to return to the era of regular financial updates to each of the boards.
And I think, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, Kelly. That's good news, Jim. I think I heard Tanny. I think he just wants to make sure, we're doing our due diligence as board members. His role as treasurer, is definitely, I really values Tanny's role as treasurer, and he does take it seriously. And, Nick, you can fully agree as a treasurer, you need to know where the money's going.
Absolutely.
So I fully, I'm appreciative of MCDD's support to provide him the reports that he needs as needed. And I don't think it's going to be excessive, but it's just seeing what's going out.
It's a fundamental obligation of a board member, and we welcome the scrutiny. It's super important for public trust, which is essential to our success. So I share your opinion, and I'm grateful for the scrutiny. Super important.
And Kelly, I know we had a briefing on this previously, and this is, I think, our third meeting we've had this topic.
Second or third, yeah, I can't remember exactly, yeah.
So I have no questions. I know we've kind of gone through the discussion, and thanks, MCD, for the support, hearing Mr. Stephenson's concerns out.
Definitely. And so I don't know, Emily, if you've got the motion, the proposed motion on the agenda.
It's item E on the agenda.
Yep. Well, I'll do it. I move to approve resolution 2021-06-06, adopting a policy on district contract signing authority delegation for the Sandy Drainage Improvement Company.
And
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Ken Anderton?
yes.
Tanny Stephenson?
Yes.
And Tom Hansel votes yes. Motion carries 3-0. Kelly, thank you for your persistence.
Hey,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair,
thank you,
if I
Kelly.
may, Tanny, it means a lot to me that you made that motion. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to earn your trust, and I'm going to work really hard to keep it. So it was meaningful to me that you made that motion. Thank you very much. I appreciate your trust, and again, I'm going to do everything I can to maintain it.
Appreciate you guys too. Thank you very much for working with us.
I'm gonna just I'm gonna go up to item C, contract approvals. Anything for us today, Nick?
No, sir. But the standing item, as you know, just in case we have some, and we have none today.
Yep, thank you so much.
Woohoo.
Emily, are we okay going down to item F at this time? I think-
Yeah, I think that should be fine. Jamie's here as well as Mark, so.
Welcome, Mark. Welcome, Jamie. Item F, the PMLS cost sharing and funding options item.
Thanks, Tom. I'll let Jamie kick us off.
Yeah, and Mark, if you want to share your screen with the slideshow, that would be great.
Emily, can you distribute the slideshow as well? It really helps me for preservation.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Okay.
There we go.
Are you seeing the correct version? Just want to make sure.
We're seeing a version. I'm going to assume.
Rusted out.
It's not the presenter version, is it? I just want to make sure.
It looks good.
It looks good,
It
yeah.
says SDIC on it.
Great.
I think it must be the right one. Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks for having us on the agenda again. As you recall, when we met with you back in July, we presented a kind of the next 18 months snapshot of the different topics that we'd be bringing forward to you with regard to PED and the PMLS project. And so today we're continuing that conversation with what we talked about last month around the cost allocation and revenue options. So we have a little agenda for you, and we've got a couple of speaker spots. So Mark, you want to go to the next slide? So again, the objective is to just review the potential cost allocation methods again, remind us all what those are. If you remember, we talked last month about, it's good to keep these things in front of us. We get more familiar with them, we get more comfortable with how we're discussing them, and we take a little bit deeper dive every time with with more questions. We wanted to have a little bit more conversation with folks about these topics. There's no decision required right now. It's informational. And so the way we've got this little mini agenda for today is Jim's going to talk about just a little background about why this matters, kind of that bigger context of what are we all doing this for? What are we doing this project for? And then an update. Jim's also going to get an update on the visit from the Major General Graham, who was here, I think it was last week, 2 weeks ago, fairly recently. And then Mark's going to remind you all about the potential, the cost allocation methods, and also share with you some of the potential funding options that we're exploring right now. And then what we heard in July and our answers to those. And then ongoing discussion, whatever questions you want us to take away from today's conversation. So with that, I think we're going to hand it over to Jim for just a little context setting about why we're doing this project. So Mark, you want to advance a slide? There you go. Okay, Jim. So
thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. Members of the board, I thought it was really important. We were talking about how best to present this information as a staff. And I noted that we kind of jumped right into the details and into the weeds of the stuff that's actually very important for you as board members. But I wanted to just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to step back and kind of remind us all that at the end of the day, we're here to provide flood safety for a whole bunch of people and businesses that we really care about. And so this slide is just a reminder that we have had a number of instances of flooding throughout our history, and some fairly recently, as recent as 2017. We are also seeing these unprecedented rainfall events around the world, really, including here in the United States, but also in other countries. And so what the opportunity before us here is to be reminded of our fundamental purpose, and then also, you can move the slide forward, also acknowledge that there are very real implications if we're unsuccessful. These are photos from Vanport, and let's do one more slide, please. And this is 1996. You can see that the shipping channel looks a little different in 1996 than it does today, and hopefully this won't occur again. And the fundamental thing, we do need to get into the details, and we need to make sure that every landowner is treated in an equitable fashion. But I also want to remind you that we are in a set of circumstances in which we are poised to receive 65% of the cost of modernizing our system to address these new challenges from the federal government. And if we can collaborate here locally, that is such a huge return on our investment. And right now we're talking about PED costs, which are in the range of $5 million, which could ultimately leverage, well over $100 million locally in investments to keep us safe. So I just wanted to start with that to remind you why we're here and what our objective is, which is to really win a huge federal investment in our region, modernize our system, address these changing threats, and keep everyone safe. So if I could find that kind of a return on investment anywhere else, I probably wouldn't be working here. And I just want to remind you, we have such a huge opportunity. And maybe one more slide and I'll punctuate it and then stop talking. I think we have the general next. No, this is Germany. Again, this was just last month to remind you of the implications. And then just to close up and get to the reason why you guys really want to talk about this is, let's go to the Colonel slide, please. Colonel in general. We did have a visit with the local colonel and the Major General from Washington, D.C. of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We toured our system with the Corps leadership and the staff, and it was a really terrific visit. Both the Corps team and our team did a fantastic job briefing the Major General, and he's advising the very top leaders in the Corps in Washington, D.C. about signing our chief's report. And I guess I'll close by saying we had set up after our tour, we did a briefing in our office, we did a tour, and at the end of the tour, we had time set aside for our team and experts from the Corps here and in Washington, D.C. to answer any additional questions that the general might have before he briefed the chief. And we were very fortunate that he said, while still in the parking lot, that there was no need to ask any additional questions because we'd done a really thorough job with our tour and our briefing. And he said, we're exactly the kind of partner that the Corps likes to work with. And he was very optimistic and enthusiastic about our partnership and our ability to continue to move forward to win federal investment. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let's get into the details, and hopefully we can find a way to move forward to get this federal investment and modernize our system. Thank you for letting me speechify just a little bit.
Great, thanks, Jim. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and he's just going to walk through some of the revenue options that we're exploring at this point, and then remind us all about what the cost allocation methods are. And then we're going to go back to some of the questions that we heard, because we know that several of them came from SDIC, and we want to have a deeper conversation with you about that. So Mark?
Sure, I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so this particular slide is new. So the other materials we're going to go over are a little bit of a review, but we wanted to get a little bit more into potential revenue options. We still have a long way to go to fully vet and evaluate and present all these options and find out, sort of illuminate their pros and cons and provide recommendations for you and allow you to make your own decision. But obviously, the source of the revenue may have implications in terms of the allocations that you decide to use. So we wanted to fill you in on a little bit more about that. So obviously, we're looking at options that could have the least amount of impact to you, or for those of you that are concerned about incurring further debt. Look at the entire range of options. So the leading options that we've sort of looked at begin with a new state levy grant fund through Business Oregon. As you can see there, it allows for grants up to $2 million per biennium. And if each district still qualifies individually, obviously that could take care of the lion's share of PED costs. Now, obviously that's a grant, it's competitive, but we have a very competitive project, and obviously the Corps of Engineers study gives us a lot of ammunition to put forth a very competitive grant package. The next option I have listed here is assessments, and we've spoken to this issue previously. I believe Casey had commented on it. If the 4 districts, or if the districts continued at the rate of assessment increases that was sort of, we've more recently at the track we've been on, about 10% a year, we could easily fund PED in 3 of the 4 districts. Now, I know that we're not interested in increasing assessments every year in perpetuity, but this is an option, and it wouldn't incur long-term debt. The next option, obviously, if we are averse to either of those options, there's financing, and there's both public and private options. Options on the public side include things like the IFA loans that we've used in the past, and some of those options require backing from our partners, or potentially require backing from our partners, such as the past LRC IFA loans. And then there are private loans, and we're still looking into these. And I just want to stress that some of these financing options are not as simple as they may seem, and they may be complicated, and they may not end up being desirable. But these are options that we want to vet and look into, and just provide you with the entire list of pros and cons, so that it can be part of a package potentially if we need to make up funds. So interest rates, however, are favorable, as everyone knows currently. And so if we are sort of pushed in that direction, or desire offsetting some of our costs in that direction, it could be a pretty considerable return on investment until at least rates go up. Other options that I have mentioned along the bottom, essentially mention reserves. Not all districts have the same amount of reserves. For some, that may be an option to consider. And then obviously we could do a composite of any of these options. Last thing I want to just remind you all, this was presented in the past, was when the money hits or when it's due. So PED is scheduled to be a 3.5-year design phase. The Corps will ask us at the beginning of each year for the funds required to complete the work they anticipate to execute for that year. So it's not required all up front. It's spaced out through the 3.5 years. And there is potential at some point that we begin construction phase, and any remaining design activities get rolled into construction phase. But for conservative purposes, we'll assume that it's 3.5 years where we'll need that $5.6 million allocated between the districts and distributed among the 4 years. So Evan, did I miss anything? Is there anything you want to add? And then I see Tom has a question as well.
Yeah, I think just really quickly to kind of frame up why we're providing this information. At our last meeting, we kind of dove right into the cost allocation methods and really started to dig into the weeds there. We wanted to bring this information to you to really kind of start to frame that discussion, because depending on how the revenue options work out, that could potentially impact what cost allocation methodology you choose, or if we need to go down the road of a complicated one. If we can get each of you $2 million, that's $6 million that we so it changes the discussion around cost allocation potentially. So we just wanted you to have this context.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Tom?
Thank you. So under the state levy grant fund, is there a reason you excluded other local government participation in that? You know, the cities, metro, port, county for financial support? Or are you just saying that's a non-starter?
Oh, we were talking about for the state levy grant fund. That's a very specific grant fund that we created with the legislature in 2019. So am I understanding your question correctly?
No, I
Yeah,
think
well,
what
I didn't hear, you know, could we approach City of Portland, you know, for supporting Peninsula One's projects, or,
Yes.
you know, where is that considered in this, these options?
Absolutely. I think we are going to have to talk to partners about a number of costs associated with this project. And obviously, Penn One is one of the areas that we're going to need to work with partners to ensure that they can kind of come along with us on this, on this road.
Yeah, so if I can reframe, Tom, I think what you're reacting to is there isn't a box up here that says partner, you know, revenues from partners. I think that's what's missing.
Okay. We can add that.
Yeah.
Jim, what were you going to say?
Mr. Chair, we are in a pretty thorough set of conversations with the appropriate city staff to address a whole range of issues around the PMLS project, and working probably towards some sort of an agreement, whether that's an IGA or just a memo of understanding or something. We're not quite there yet, but we have all the bureaus sitting at the table. And as you know, Mike Jordan, the chair of the Urban, is helping us coordinate with all those folks to make sure that the city is capable of supporting the PED when we get to that point.
Great, thank you.
Great. To see any other questions, and we'll make sure to add that box in future iterations. So that's quite clear. I think in my mind, I saw it as being somewhere lumped under public loans, but that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
you'll be joining me for the meeting with Chair Kafori, Tom, when we make that ask. I'm joking.
You have Commissioner Stegman on your board. She's your one.
All right, I have a meeting with her next week. You're welcome to join, by the way.
One question on that. Is there any other funding sources that might be coming up with the infrastructure package as well?
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about that with our federal lobbyists and watching really closely, because there is language in the Senate package that suggests that the folks that developed it were thinking that there's a possibility of funding some portion of core projects without a local match. So if that were the case and we could go get funding for PED, it's possible that we might be able to fund it fully at the federal level. But that, you know, we're waiting for guidance on that language. And then absolutely, we think that the timing aligns really well to try to get a majority of the funds through the infrastructure package for the pre-engineering and design phase. Unfortunately, at least right now, it's looking like the construction phase won't align time-wise, but I just had a conversation on Monday with our lobbyists about, is there any way we could fund all of this at once instead of just doing PED and then construction, or could we do, you know, a combination of earmarks and infrastructure bill funding to try to get it all funded all at once, or some other blend. And so she's having some conversations this week to see what's possible. But the big thing is that the infrastructure bill has, it's like a supersized version of what's usually given to the Corps, with fewer restrictions. And so there should be something in there to help us fund this project, move it forward quickly, and hopefully avoid, you know, hopefully find ways to minimize what we have to pay for locally.
Then I know you've talked to the state on the state levy grant fund. Is there any opportunity for any American Rescue Plan dollars that the state has set aside?
Yeah, I have made that ask of our state lobbyist. He does not believe that they're timing wise and the way those funds have been appropriate or committed so far. But we are continuing to ask the speaker's office about, making sure that we're aware of any opportunity.
Yeah, I think the constructability issue is going to be one of the core questions, because there's a lot of argument right now is is there enough projects in the pipeline that can get get built? Is there enough people to build them? And I think if you can provide that pathway, I think the chances and a plan to get there, the chances of getting it funded is probably much greater. So appreciate all your work on this.
Can reflect that the Major General, when he was here, was talking about ongoing conversations with the administration via Office of Management and Budget and criteria for the Corps changing, but the new administration not completing some of that work. But the trajectory of the policy conversation seems to be aiming in a direction that makes our project more competitive rather than less.
Okay. Mark, you want to remind us about the allocation methodologies?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. So this part should look very familiar to everyone. This is this slide has the leading methods that we spoke to last time, and the following slide will have the reference methods that we discussed. So just as a refresher, obviously, economic benefit, also essentially damages avoidance, is cited up there by itself. And then there's 3 composites that we came up with, different combinations of project costs or head costs, and then hybridized with the economic benefits. So I think we discussed those pretty thoroughly. Certainly take any questions after I finish to make sure that you're all clear on this. I think we put a lot of materials out as well for your reference. These are the reference methods. These are essentially either traditional methods or I call sort of building blocks in some cases, where some of them don't necessarily stand on their own. In some cases they do, but in order to balance cost and benefit, we came up with the composite cost for your consideration. And again, we don't need to arrive at any decisions right now. This is simply to continue to sort of socialize these and answer questions, allow for discussion, possibly come up with other composites that we certainly don't certainly look for other creativity to come into the mix and help us with these. So these are all the methodologies. We also heard from some of the districts that they didn't want to necessarily narrow us down to just showing the leading methods. So we still have all the information is available so that you can look at some of the new ideas and compare them against some of the metrics that you're accustomed to seeing and considering. So we have this very big table. We have different ways we've tried to display this data. So if you have other ways or preferences, just let us know. I think we had some bar graphs last time. We went back to the basics this time, but if any of those were helpful, please let us know. So that was one. That was sort of a review. Obviously now we added the revenue mix in there, and again, we're not looking for any major decisions. We're just trying to allow you to have a discussion within your district about some of these topics. I'm going to address the first 4 here of items that we heard in July. So there was a discussion about deferred maintenance and how that was considered in the core project formulation. And I think I wanted to clear up a misconception that the core project formulation does not allow for deferred maintenance. And so there was several projects that were initially considered, but were later removed because they were considered deferred maintenance. None of the projects, so while some of the projects were, I can honestly say we know things, some of our legacy projects were a little bit flawed from the beginning, whether that would be the nature of their construction or the nature of their design. There's nothing on the project list that is really about, we didn't keep up with maintenance and that's why we have to do this. Now, in some cases, we're trying to keep up with a 50-year planning horizon, looking forward and making sure we can meet the needs of the future. But there are some things where they're geotechnical shortcomings or pump shortcomings or things like that. They were generally not due to O&M shortcomings in general. So, but in some cases we made new discoveries about geotechnical fragilities and things like that, or pump insufficiencies, or pump station elevations, as in the case of SDIC's pump station. And we were essentially handed a poor design, not intentionally, but the Corps just didn't have all the available knowledge they had back then. And so this study is all about trying to address those vulnerabilities, not looking back at blame. So I'll move on from deferred maintenance. I already spoke to the second item about keeping all the methodologies available and displayed so we can talk about them. There was also concern about setting a precedent by selecting a particular allocation for PED, that we would create a precedent for other funding allocations. And I think it's important to realize that you, the board, the four boards are our policymakers. We can document whatever assumptions you've made or your intent in passing any future resolutions about allocations, and try to and certainly stave off any precedents being set. If you make a specific decision about allocation for PED due to certain factors that don't apply in the future, we can sort of state those and keep those precedents at bay. Make the decision that's best for you for PED. I'm going to jump to this other item first, and there was a few.
And I'll just jump in on the authorities question. I think the whole board knows that there's some conversation happening, and we're anxious to have that be a really thoughtful and open dialogue with you all about that. So more to come, I suspect, on that. But we heard you.
Unclear.
So Jim, is SDIC's question on authority the only district, or other districts they have? I mean, us being established under 564 and our articles of incorporation, do the other districts have anything similar, or are we the only one questioning authority?
I am not aware of any concerns being formally raised by the other districts, but staff who've been here longer may have heard something. It's more the actual cost piece that they're focused on. Kelly, anything? Have you heard anything?
Not about authorities. I agree that we've had conversations over the years about how to handle exactly this, the cost allocation, what's a fair method of doing that, but not any concern that going about this as a joint project, particularly because that's how the federal agencies see our system, is as a system. And so we've always kind of approached it, and I haven't heard any questions about there being an authority issue, particularly because of the very broad authority that we have under ORS 190 to cooperate with other public entities.
Okay. And again, there's going to be more discussion on this particular item, but I'm going to move forward to this sort of additional topics question, and this was sort of built into some of these other questions, but there was questions about how do you calculate economic benefits, and so how that was done. And Corps does a great job of diving into the weeds, but they do a much less good job, much poorer job of simplifying and summarizing in layman's terms. So while I can refer, as I stated last time, I can refer you to the economics appendix of the study for those who want to deep dive. I think our goal is to just solicit feedback on whether or not you want some sort of summary or additional presentation to, I won't say to go really deep, but just go deep enough so that you have a good comprehensive knowledge of what was undertaken to calculate the economic benefits for the study, because it is a very comprehensive metric for and helpful for making decision whether on its own or part of other metrics. So economic benefits is one of those topics, and then life loss modeling. I think you heard another board brought that up. How do we figure it? Was life loss modeling even factored in? And the answer is a resounding yes. And actually, General Graham, when he visited, he asked, was there sound engineering behind it? And we could sort of very with a straight face say, yes, there was sound engineering behind this work. There was also very in-depth economic analysis done, as well as life loss modeling. Not very many studies have had the resources to produce a full life loss model. It's kind of a newer thing that's been developed, but we integrated both these factors to a degree that I'm not sure it's relatively unprecedented. And part of that comes because the 4 districts came to the table with a lot of data gathered ahead of time. And so we kind of had a jump on information gathering for the study, and that allowed us to use our resources more effectively and use that $3 million a lot more effectively. So getting back to what you need in the future, I guess any input on whether or not you would like separate information sessions, additional board presentations, or just sort of a short white paper executive summary of those sections, so that you have a better understanding of those topics. I'm just looking for feedback.
Fellow directors, Tanny, Ken, anything for Mark?
I don't know about this at this time, but I was a little confused on where are we with legal review.
Legal review of what, Tanny?
Of allocation.
Are we back to the board's authority question, Tanny? Is that the question?
Yeah. I didn't get a clear answer on that.
So my understanding of events, and Mr. Chair, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that after the last conversation, Chair Hansel and I exchanged some emails, and I directed our staff to come up with some response to Tom's questions, which I believe just recently. Unfortunately, with vacations, I wasn't able to get it back to Tom until Friday, which I know was short notice, but I believe he shared that with you all, my email, and I think Mr. Sheets got a copy of that. And we're really interested in making sure, Tanny, that you have maybe a better opportunity than on a phone at the side of a dorm room to have that conversation. But we respect that you guys need to have that conversation, and we're very interested in making that work for you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Brian, and just so you know, I've gone through a legal review of this. I came to some different conclusions than what Jim presented. So if we want to, I'm ready to dive into that if you are, or we can save that for another time.
Yeah, and we're open to doing it at the discretion of the board. And Tanny, I just know this is very important to you, and I want to make sure you have a full opportunity to participate. But we're happy to start today too, if you'd like. Again, this is an important question, and I'm glad we're digging into it and trying to come to a conclusion. It's important.
So I just want to recognize Tanny, I believe, is going to be needing to step off, and I think this is going to take more than a minute or two. So Jim, I appreciate your consideration. This will take a thoughtful conversation, and let's not rush it. And Brian, thank you for, I know you're ready to present, and So can we agree that we should get this back on a separate SDIC agenda? I'll leave it to Mark and Jamie to kind of dictate when it has to happen. But I think not to speak for Tanny, but I think he's saying we kind of have to address the authority before we start talking about the other considerations. Because if authority says we can't do it, the other ones are mute. So I think that's kind of we have to go in that order.
Yeah, Tom, I think after reviewing Brian's info and wanting to hear his detailed analysis, I'm wondering if we just want to have that as a standalone item, maybe a special session, work session to talk about it.
I think a work session makes a lot of sense. And I don't know whether it would please the board or not to have maybe Kelly and Brian have a conversation separately to come up with the best way to present if there's a difference of opinion, how to share that in a collaborative way. I don't know, I'm open. I think this is really important and the board really needs to be fully vested in how we discuss it, so.
Yeah, Brian, Kelly, I mean, are you two willing to kind of have a discussion? And I guess I agreed the format, so we're not debating it, we're kind of presenting it.
No, fair enough. Yeah, I'm familiar with or comfortable with, however, I mean, my job is to give you legal advice and for you to take that advice and use it at your discretion for your decision-making processes. And so I'm comfortable in open setting, detailing my conclusions and my findings, and we can do that. However, I mean, we do it now, we could do it later. We could just open it up and I can just start talking about it. It doesn't really matter to me on the format.
Well, it sounds like that Tanny's going to be leaving us shortly and that he wants to be part of this. He needs to be part of this conversation. So what I'm hearing is that Kelly and Brian would meet, exchange notes, get a sense of where each is coming from, and that we would set up a separate work session focused on this item to have a deeper conversation sooner than the next SDIC meeting. That's where it sounds like where we're landing. I see some head.
I mean, I can chat with Kelly and see what's going on, but to the extent that I need to try and convince her of my position, I mean, that's not my job. My job is to advise the board.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to get into persuasion. I was trying to think through how best to present the information, but we can just schedule the meeting and then have you two each do your presentations too. I don't want to create extra work. Just trying to make sure that
I think that might make the most sense. I think, Brian's seen our analysis and Brian has his own analysis, and we can just, each present and answer questions or give our opinions. And then the board can make a decision.
Save some money. That's always good.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay,
And then
so
I saw some head nodding about a work session before the next SDIC meeting, rather than waiting. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, I see Chair Hansel nodding.
So Emily, I'm assuming we can count on you to try and wrangle a time that'll work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mark, I will ask a question on the other models. So if you had 3 economists look at this separately, would they all land? How close would they be landing to the same answer? I mean, I see a lot of subjectivity in these approaches.
You're speaking to
that's
the
kind of a squishy place to be in.
Yeah, so you're speaking to the allocation methods versus the models themselves or the data. Okay, just want to be clear. Yeah, I mean, I think that we haven't done an extensive review by peer review by economists yet, but certainly economic benefits is a standard metric used. That's why the core has an entire model built for economic benefits. I think I provided some examples too that other special districts in other states have requirement where there's a not a uniform or non-standard special assessment made to ratepayers, that the rates are developed based on economic benefits. So it's so that the folks that receive the best benefit pay that proportional share. We created the other methods as a weighted average, not unlike perhaps some utility rate models are developed where they balance both costs incurred and benefits received. But we can certainly get, we plan to do a greater review of these, but obviously wanted to get some feedback on which ones were of greatest interest. And also just to explain that why the traditional methods maybe may not make the most sense. In this case, for instance, levy mileage does not reflect benefits received nor costs incurred, because there are limited projects in some areas of the levy and not in others. So whereas for O&M, that's a great metric to use for levies, because you're mowing kind of generally throughout the entire system. So it's calculated on mileage in lieu of actual square footage, pretty accurate. But in this case, the Corps' work is distributed unevenly throughout the entire system. So we are looking for metrics that are more defensible than our traditional ones. I hope does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know this well, so I'm just kind of envisioning in my head. I mean, we don't have access to all the businesses in the district boundaries to understand what their standing inventory is, what would be damaged, what would be their operating losses. That's just an estimation based on.
Okay, so
have you inventoried every facility to say what is their average revenues, how many FTE, what's their payroll, what's their operating cost? If they were down for a week, what would be their loss? I mean, we don't have that level of detail, I'd expect. It's more of a industry sector estimation.
The HEC FDA model does not compute the revenue losses, for instance. It does compute building replacement costs, and then it estimates building content value. And they basically used 100% building content as a default if no other information was available. And so for some facilities, we as I mentioned last time, for some facilities such as the airport or for public infrastructure, it didn't accurately reflect the value of the damages. We did add-ons, and we tried to make sure those costs were adequately reflected. For instance, Port of Portland, we know there's a lot of ground service equipment. We know from the 96 floods and others where they tried to get aircraft out from the airport and out of the floodplain. They raised power lines to get unserviceable military aircraft out of the floodplain, for instance. We said we need to do a little bit deeper dive on some of these things that are not built into a standard core model. So we got an inventory of port ground maintenance equipment, for instance. We went to Portland Water Bureau and looked at some of the Portland well field well assets that look like a tiny spot on the map, but they're an electrical control panel that's a $100,000 replacement value. So those are some of the things that we dug into. And I think as we move forward in the future, there is an opportunity to do a second dive on economic benefits analysis, I think after a 2 to 3 year window to update it. And so we might have that opportunity. But I think the HEC FDA model is based on a pretty comprehensive and standard methodology. So I think it's pretty reliable. Those 100% replacement costs are based on empirical data, as are the depth damage curves that everything is based on. So so there are always going to be some outliers, but I think on average it's pretty comprehensive, and it's more comprehensive than the FEMA HAZUS model that we did previously in economic benefits studies, which only takes into account sort of the building damage and not contents.
Mark, how does it handle national security type facilities within the boundary. Like I'm thinking of Bonneville Power Administration. If that substation and the lines get wiped out, it could potentially wipe out power to both, Oregon, but Southwest Washington and California.
That's a great question, Ken. We actually did connect Dennis, the Corps' economist, with PGE, PacifiCorp, and Bonneville Power to try to get some assessment of what some of those outages could mean. And they were. I also want to make sure that you understand that they're also very realistic. So in some cases we didn't benefit. Sometimes there are nationally significant resources, but there are reroutes and there are redundancies in the system. So in some of those cases, we found out that PacifiCorp, for instance, and PGE, they had power reroutes. So if the incoming transfer stations in Troutdale went down, it would reroute, I think, all the way to Clatskanie and back. So there are, I think he did a pretty comprehensive analysis. There was also, the Corps is only allowed to take, for some of the outage type analyses, which this is all in the benefits or the economics appendix, for some of the reroute things, like where commerce has to be rerouted, train or aircraft, or even, I think they even had some impact for personal use of interstates, but primarily rail and air cargo freight, for instance. If there's another port in the region that would support that product or that cargo, then it wasn't considered nationally significant damage. It was considered, reroutable and considered an inconvenience. So all those things came into play. Again, we'd happy to do a deeper dive. I think I went pretty deep, but I'm happy to do a deeper dive to give you a sense of the shortcomings, but as well as the strengths of some of these models. And for those who are interested.
I think as long as you've touched base with Bonneville Power's engineers, then you're fine. But from what I understand, they have very little. Troutdale is very critical to the grid because they step down power there from the dam, the hydro, and the wind and renewables. So it's hard to move power around, that much power around.
Yeah. We did try to reach out to all those major resources, and I'll be honest, in some cases they were we had to reach back to them a second time because they were, we have our contingencies and what is this truly all about? We have reroutes and redundancies, and you're like, no, you don't understand. We're trying to protect your asset here, and imagine 20 feet of water and in the SDIC floodplain where you're critical. The models actually take into account the threshold level of elevation where damages start to occur and where you have a total loss, and that level of detail. So every utility or other major company was approached, and in that sense, like we're trying to find out where things start to hurt for you or where you're completely inoperable, and please provide this. So the quality of data. And I'll say there was always an entry in there, and it was that base entry for HEC FDA. But in some cases, we tried to tease out more from those entities, and I think we did a pretty fair job. Over.
Yeah, and within SDIC, I think it's really unique in that you have three major power substations, and then you have a unique building that has a lot of robotics in it with Amazon that is super expensive. And then, so you've got a lot of assets that are really expensive to replace just within that really short boundary of even if SDIC. And the economic impacts of the grid going down is huge, right? Cutting out wind power and hydro to the state. And there are redundancies, but they have to reduce the capacity significantly. So I'm glad just something to think of if you ever have to update it. You may want to get some BPA engineers in the room and make sure you're getting a full understanding of what their capabilities are.
Absolutely. And like I said, we have been speaking to our our core consultant, our Larson Roselle, they kind of advise us on things to make sure our plan formulation is complete. And he's the one who advised me about the potential for future updates. So we'll keep all those things in mind, and we'll certainly look, try to make sure there wasn't any stones that were turned over in the previous iteration.
So I'm mindful that we're just buttoned right up to the next agenda items. So Tom, did you want to see if there are any other questions of your group before we hand it back to you?
Yeah, these two aren't shy. No, they'll speak right up. So, Danny, you still with us?
Yeah, I had one question. Mark, you mentioned 100%. Does that mean like we value it at 100% of its cost?
That means that unless other information is provided, the building contents are valued at 100% of the building replacement value. And I can provide, you know, a few individual examples offline if that's helpful for you to visualize. But so we provided a lot of that when we were doing revenue study, the past revenue studies. But yeah, so if a building, and keep in mind that building replacement values vary based on the nature of their construction. So concrete versus manufactured home, for instance. So some of those have damages later in the flooding or with higher depth of flooding, and some trigger early. So it varies, but still obviously a pretty significant cost when let's say for instance the FedEx building gets flooded with 20 feet of flooding. So it actually doesn't start until about 6 feet because their loading docks raise the first floor elevation of all the structures up above the first 6 feet of flooding. But then after that, it starts to do significant damage.
Okay. Yes. I mean, if we're looking at 100% of it, and probably then 100% of their fixed assets.
What we're looking at is their building contents or all their assets in their building are assumed, unless we have other information, are assumed to be 100% of whatever damage to the building occurs and replacement value of that building at that level of flooding. So if the building is expected to be damaged $10 million replacement value or replacement cost, then the contents mirror that.
Okay.
So again, in the future, if there are some extremely high value buildings, we can take another look at that in the future if we rerun these models. But
yeah, I think probably Amazon's probably the one that's kind of outlier in terms of all the robotics and the nature of it having high-end equipment. The other though can have up to 300 tractor trailer units. So you've got 150,000 per unit. That adds up really quick. And then the local delivery fleet too. There's over 300 local delivery fleet for both FedEx and Amazon. So depends on when it happens, obviously. But if it's like in the middle of the night where they're all at home, it could add up quickly.
Yeah, and I know that we're running short on time, but just to give you one more, hopefully a sense of confidence. And I'm not saying that everything was absolutely captured 100%. I think they did their best. And then I think there's multipliers to account for the fact that they can't capture everything precisely. But the models are run for 2 different time periods, day and night. So the values of all the flooding scenarios take that into account. Also takes into account with a number for the life loss modeling when people are present day and night. So that counts for shift work. But with respect to, you mentioned the tractor trailers, just to give you a sense, I know that I believe it's an SDIC or maybe it's MCDD East. There's a huge like RV storage facility. There are in MCDD, there are large parking lots for the airport, and the values of the vehicles in those parking lots were calculated. So They went to that level of detail, looking at these assets that were floating around and literally using aerial photos and unless they had other information available to calculate those things. So they did try to capture those sort of loose assets and mobile assets over.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Mark. I'm thinking we've got our questions out to you at this time.
Okay. And like I said at the beginning, we'll be back every month with a little bit more about what we know, with a little bit more information about the questions relating to PED, and so that we can get more familiar, and it's that progressive disclosure conversation that we're having about this project. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, and other board members are raising kind of similar questions. So I guess I would also just say if there's something that you're really interested in or is bothering you or making you happy even, let me know and we can connect you with Mark or the appropriate core staff to make sure you can get the information you're looking for. We want to make sure you know what's in there, and it isn't perfect, but it's pretty good.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
So if we can move on to item D, officer elections and appointment discussion. This is coming off of our last meeting where we're a 3-member board, but we have 2 vacant seats. And I'm just hoping Ken or Tanny might have some ideas of how we might approach individuals who may be representatives of these lands in our boundaries. I'll just leave it open for discussion, Ken or Tanny.
I
I have some ideas, but I don't have anything firm yet. But if all else fails, there are a few houseless individuals around that we could probably snag a couple of those.
As long as you can tie them to land.
Yep.
and I was thinking one of the
What was that, Ken?
oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I just think, I'm trying to go at it from the landowner's perspective and trying to, entice somebody to join the board.
And I was thinking about, it's really tough to get FedEx or Amazon to, Amazon in particular is tough because they're a subtenant of the developer, and
Yep.
it's owned by an investment group. FedEx is owned, but they're busy, they're understaffed, and so I was thinking one of the utilities would be good to have on the board. They have a background, since we are kind of a utility, a background, and there's several assets protected by the utilities. So I'm doing some ongoing outreach.
Both Pacific Core and PG have good presence in this area. So, and I don't know our future if we're going to continue with the virtual meetings, but that might be a selling point too. The ease of connecting into this committee, just getting online versus driving and commuting to a facility. So if that's a sale point, maybe some meetings are at the office when we choose to return, but we continue to embrace virtual meetings just for the efficiency it affords us.
I would offer the board, staff will not be taking a proactive role in this, but if there's anyone you would like us to meet with or provide information to, just let us know. But this is the purview of the board. But we stand ready to support you if there's someone who wants more information or a briefing, and we would only do that at your request.
Much thanks, Jim.
Yep.
So
thank you.
And Ken and Tanny, thank you for reaching out to some candidates. So just a reminder, we have 2 vacant seats. So if you have 2 candidates, let's try to get them on board. And I'll make myself available if they want to talk to another person. I know you 2 have a tendency to be a little suspicious at times, but just for a third opinion, or a second opinion.
Okay.
Thank you both. Moving on to Executive Director's Report.
Okay, I'll try and be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to give you a heads up that I've asked our team to develop equity policy, equity resolution, sort of built on the framework of the MCDD equity policy. MCDD is a little bit different because it has staff, and a lot of the adopted policy by MCDD is sort of aimed at management of staff and the types of staff and the diverse staff and so on. So I'm working with our team to develop something that we will share with you at your next meeting for your consideration. Equity was a big part of my hire, I believe. It was a part of a lot of the questions. So I'm taking that mandate fairly seriously and want to see if we can't create a set of consistent values across all the districts. So something will come to you before your next meeting is my goal for your consideration. It will be more on the high level statement of values, but I wanted to give you that heads up. And then similarly, we are working hard as a staff to prepare some resolutions for each of the boards regarding homelessness and our facilities. And so our legal team has been looking into what our authorities are on properties that we own, but also on properties in which we have easements. And we're going to formulate that into a policy that would make sure the boards can adopt something that gives staff the ability to try and do more proactive regulation of the time, place, and manner of the uses of our levies and our other facilities. Our objective is to send a clear signal to our partners and the underlying landowners of our easements that we really do need to protect this flood safety system from some of the damages that are being caused by camping. There's potholes and other things that make it hard for us to inspect or know whether we've got a boil or a seep as opposed to just a depression in the ground. And so once we have that policy in place, we believe we'll be able to engage in a fairly assertive signage program that will make it clear that these are facilities that are inappropriate for camping activities. And ideally, then it will also give us a little bit of opportunity to reach out to some of the underlying landowners that, hey, we really need to partner with you to take care of the situation to ensure that our system is operating safely. I want to let you know that we are also looking into conversation with Metro about garbage cleanup. So I have a meeting with them in the next few days to see if there's a mutually beneficial arrangement for their reducing illegal dumping program. We are also looking at expanding our contract with Cascadia Behavioral Health. They're the not-for-profit that works with homeless folks a lot, that does outreach for us. We are looking at increasing our contract with Rapid Response BioClean. They're the folks that help us clean up these camps once we're able to ask people to move out. And we have entered into a contract with a towing company. We use that company on Schmear Road by a pump station there and by our relief wells. We have trouble accessing that site. So we had a cleanup, I believe it was just last week. And we are looking into options for a few of our sites where our operations team does not feel safe. And so we've had an initial outreach to the Portland Police Bureau where they have a program where you can hire off-duty officers. We just got the template contract yesterday, so it'll be a week or so while we evaluate that and see if it's going to be cost effective for us to get some support in just a couple of locations. And finally, also looking at the potential to vend with a private security firm for those times when it would be outside of the scope of the police bureau's special duty contracts, so that our team can get in and do their jobs and operate our facilities and maintain them while still feeling safe. So be looking for a proposed resolution that would help make sure that we have your blessing to sign our facilities and to sort of step up our actions to both be compassionate for people who are currently forced to live outside, but also ensure that we can access our facilities and that we can minimize the damage that's currently happening to some of them. So that's my report. I guess last, I just want to reiterate the core visit was really strong, and the general's really optimistic that we're going to get some support from the Congress, and I'm really excited about moving forward with all of that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ken, any questions for Jim?
No questions.
Tammy?
No, great job, Jim. Thank you.
And I just want to give a shout out to legal and to Bill Owen and to Randy and the operations team. If you happen to see any of those folks out in the field, if you could just give them a pat on the back and thank them for their work. It's challenging. I'm sorry, Tom, I interrupted you.
No, I appreciate that. I fully agree that they need the recognition and support. I was just questioning SDIC's boundaries. Our law enforcement is the county sheriff, correct?
Yep.
So I think over the 4 districts, you have City of Portland, Gresham, and the sheriff as your law enforcement agencies. So do you feel the sheriff is, you probably get a different connection with each of those organizations. And SDIC, we want to support, and if there's anything I could do and going through my chain of command to get down to the sheriff, I'm ready to do that. But I'm hoping the sheriff and his deputies are supporting your staff as they work in the field. I'm not seeing as much obvious camps in the SDIC boundaries as I do as I go down the levee. And you go down the levee from SDIC, you go through a small portion of Gresham, and then the trouble seems to really manifest in the City of Portland. Am I accurate with that?
I think certainly our top priority areas all fall within the City of Portland. I will say the Sheriff's Office has been helpful. We are bringing them into some conversations about Pump Station 4 because it borders Gresham. But they have been supportive so far. And we are working with the City of Gresham. The Mayor Stovall met with City of Portland Commissioner Ryan about a week ago. Our staff is working on drafting some letters on behalf of the Mayor of Gresham to the Mayor of Portland, to Commissioner Ryan, and to Chair Kafori. I did chat briefly with Liam Frost to get his okay to talk to Mark Jolin in the joint office to see if we can't get some increased outreach out there. I left a message for him earlier this week, and I know he's busy. We're partnering really closely with the City of Portland and all the bureaus, doing some good work with Emerald Bogue and others at the Port of Portland. So we see a lot of willingness to try and partner up, but I think every jurisdiction is kind of in the same situation where it's just a really challenging set of circumstances that we're facing. But I do see an increased amount of effort going into it, and I see more resources being brought to bear. I do think it's going to be months before we're really through it, but I think we're starting to gain a little bit of momentum again. So that would be my assessment. And I just do want to stress, Portland Bureau of Transportation has been very helpful. The Water Bureau has been helpful. So we are getting our calls returned, and we are trying to collaborate around a way to move forward. So, but again, it's just expensive. It's complicated. Fundamentally, without law enforcement authority, we can do a lot of work to ask people to move, and we can clean up around them. But when they refuse to move, we need to move into some sort of a law enforcement thing. And our priority right now is with the City of Portland. So that's our focus.
Thanks, Jim.
And yeah, Ray and Troutdale also said, hey, if you ever have a problem with our area, give me a call and we'll get on it. So we've gotten great support from the city of Troutdale as well.
Ken or Tanny, any new business you want to elevate?
I have none.
The only other thing we needed to just formalize, since you just had your landowner meeting, if you want to designate the officers as far as president and secretary again for the upcoming year.
Oh, I did forget one update. My apologies. We are very close to finalizing the contract, or maybe we have finalized it, Nick knows, with Echo Northwest to move forward with this broader rate structure for the urban district. I know Tanny's on the subcommittee that's going to be helping oversee that work, but we're going to be bringing you a regular update at each of your meetings on the progress on that. We also are going to be initiating, I think I said this before, a monthly financial report and quarterly contracting reports. So coming your way. My regrets for, I turned the page on my notebook and it was at the top of the previous page on the update.
Emily, back to your comment. So we need to make a motion, volunteer for these officers?
Yes, so just following the landowner meeting, we just put it kind of on the books again for the next year. And obviously currently, Tom, you're serving as president, Tanny is treasurer. Primary responsibilities there have to do with mostly meeting management. So it's up to you all how you want to designate those responsibilities.
So I'll put it out
Mr.
there. Yes, Tanny, go ahead.
I would nominate Tom Hansel for president of Sandy Drainage Improvement Company.
I'd gladly second that.
We have a motion and a second.
Have a nice day, Tom.
Yes, thank you. It's coming back. We have a motion and a second for Tom Hansel as president of the SDIC. Ken Anderton, a roll call vote.
I vote yes.
Tanny Stephenson
Yes.
and Tom Hansel accepts. Yes.
Thank you for your public, Mr. Chair.
Yes, it's welcome aboard, Jim. SDIC board, I'd like to make a motion to nominate Tanny Stephenson as treasurer or secretary treasurer of SDIC.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote for Tanny Stephenson as secretary treasurer of SDIC? Ken Anderton?
Yes.
Tom Hansel votes yes. Tanny Stephenson?
Accept.
Thank you.
Thank you
Emily,
for
are
your
we good
service,
there?
Danny.
Okay.
I think we're good to go.
I think we're at that point. If there's no further business, we can adjourn. Thanks for all the presenters today. Good seeing everybody. I will ask, what's MCDD's plan for the future work at the offices? I see a lot of what appeared, Emily's a trooper. I see that's a very familiar space there. But the rest of us appear to be working in the confines of our own homes or other comfortable locations. Is there discussions happening at MCDD?
There are. Right now, our policy is that you can come into work on a voluntary basis. No one is required to be there. Well, that's not exactly true. There are some functions that are required to be there primarily in our finance department. And our ops team obviously has to be on site. So they're coming in, but we are requiring masks in all indoor spaces and shared vehicles and so on. And we are in active discussions about vaccination and testing policies. We are hovering around 80, I think we're at 80% vaccinations, but there is some internal tension between those who are and those who aren't. And so we're in active dialogue, and we are up to speed on the new signage requirements and trying to make sure that we stay abreast of the evolving nature of public health guidelines. And we're going to be taking a sort of not a bleeding edge approach on any of this, and really trying to look at what others are doing. I think the next update will likely be some sort of mandatory vaccination or testing protocol, and looking to create more incentives for people to get vaccinated. That's the direction we're currently headed. But no immediate return to the office. It's just not worth the risk, except for those who have to be there. Those who have to be there need to be masked.
Thanks for sharing that, Jim.
And
Yeah.
Tom, just so you know, the port pushed back our return to office originally planned for September after Labor Day, and we're going to go back sometime in 2022, first quarter of 2022.
Wow. Bravo. Yeah, the county's kind of on, we've actually, essential personnel have been there all along, but they did a forced reopening for the 7th of September, then the 13th, and then October 1st, kind of based on if you're customer facing. So.
We did make one change to have more staffing at the front desk just to deal with the phone and the gate and deliveries and some of that. And Emily was really great at trying to organize that so that the ops team and the finance team who were there more often didn't have the sole obligation of answering the phone and dealing with our deliveries and so on. So we have tried to provide some relief to those who are there performing their essential functions.
Well, my hat's off to all those essential workers who have been reporting since the start. Without them, I couldn't imagine. Well, I'm going to ask that we adjourn the SDIC board meeting today. It was good seeing everybody.